If somebody has gotten you the 12 days of Christmas, I don't want to spoil it, but I know what you're going to get today. 5 golden rings, 4 calling birds, 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge and a pear tree. Yes, it is officially the 5th day of Christmas. It was only 5 nights ago that we did gather here and celebrate the birth of the Christ child. We remembered that the light came into this world. And I think we were all just about done with Christmas by then. Some of us have been listening to Christmas music at Target since October, and I think it was the beginning of it. But as the 12 days of Christmas reminds us, the celebration of Christmas actually comes after the feast. Christmas is both the culmination of Advent and the beginning of Christmastide that leads us on to Epiphany. But Pastor Shantia will talk about that next week. But I was thinking about the 12 days of Christmas, and I wondered just how much it might actually cost us to give somebody this gift. And it did depend on the news outlet that I looked at, but there was a range. And so here are some of the figures that you might want to know if you're going to give somebody the gift of the 12 days of Christmas. On day 1 is the partridge and a pear tree, and that will cost you $210 per day. 2 turtle doves cost about $300, and that marks a decrease in price for the first time in 15 years. Now, 3 French hens are the cheapest of the feathered friends on the list, totaling $181, but you will be giving that for 10 full days. The 4 calling birds will run you just under $600. The 5 golden rings will stack up to $825, but you're also giving that 8 days in a row. Now, when you need a goose that is a laying, those will run you, when you need 6 of them, $420. But those have been getting more and more expensive. They have rose by 16% since 2017. The 7 swans of swimming haven't taken any kind of dip in price, and they'll cost you $13,000 a day. 8 maids of milking will only amount to $58, since it's tied to the federal minimum wage, and that hasn't raised in decades. There are 9 ladies dancing, considering they are a dance company, are going to be pretty pricey at about $7,500 a day. 10 lords of leaping are a ballet company, and apparently are slightly more expensive, so that'll run you around $10,000. And to get your 11 pipers piping, that's only to the tune of $2,700. And the 12 drummers drumming will bang out about $3,000. The grand total for this present, after counting each repetition of the song, will come to $170,000 for you, just over 12 days. I want to be the company that sells that to you, and only takes a little markup. These figures to tell us what it costs to show somebody your true love after Christmas. But the presents in the song don't culminate on Christmas Day, but begin that day. But what a way to celebrate Christmas with your love. But for me, it helps me remember that the celebration of this Christ child continues after Silent Night has been sung, after the candles have been extinguished, after the presents have been opened and the decorations put away. The stories of this Jesus continue on, and we continue to celebrate the things that this Jesus has done and will continue to do in this world. Matthew was interested in the days that following Jesus' birth more than he was concerned with the days that led up to it. Matthew's gospel didn't spend a ton of time on the narrative surrounding Jesus' birth. In fact, the fact that Jesus is born is a secondary fact in the last sentence of the first chapter. There are no angels in the sky. There are no shepherds in the field. There is no innkeeper or inn. It's simply they went to Bethlehem and Jesus was born. But what Matthew does spend time on are the Magi coming to see this Jesus and the subsequent escape to Egypt. Matthew spends much of the first two chapters putting forth this idea that Jesus is king. He is the true king of the Jews. We see this genealogy that runs back through the line of David all the way back to Abraham. We see these magi coming to worship the newborn king of the Jews. These magi, not knowing where they would find this newborn king, goes to where they normally would look, in the palace. But Herod, having no son, is confused that they would be coming to worship a newborn king. Herod is this so-called king of the Jews. He's the king that's been placed there by the Roman oppressors. He knew that the people he ruled only listened to him because of his army, not because they loved him or honored him. He knew his role as king was tenuous at best. So when these magi show up to honor the newborn king, the son of the king, Herod had none. He began to worry that they were looking for someone who would overthrow him. And the scholars of the day, they said, if a newborn king of the Jews is to be born, he would be born in the line of David in Bethlehem. And so the Magi go there to find Jesus and his family. Herod tells the Magi to come back and tell him where this Christ child was born, so that he too may go and worship this baby. The Magi do find Jesus, and they honor him with gifts fit for a king: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But then they are warned in a dream not to go back and tell Herod about Jesus, but to go home a different way. See, through these first couple chapters of Matthew's gospel, Jesus is portrayed as the newborn king, as this Christ child. But what happens next points to another aspect of Jesus' call. The escape to Egypt and the subsequent return should bring up images of the Hebrews' time in Egypt and the one that led them out. So many people have had questions about this section of Scripture with the slaughter of the innocent babies in Bethlehem. It is a truly horrific story, one that unfortunately has been repeated throughout history. All too often when someone's power is threatened, it is the innocent that suffer the most. Herod was afraid that a person who was truly had the right to the throne in Jerusalem might be born, and that might threaten his power, his place, and his privilege. This genocidal act is never mentioned in any other ancient witnesses of Herod's cruelty, and there was much cruelty on his part. Matthew is the sole record of this widespread murder. However, the parallels to the execution of the Jewish males, infants, at the hands of Pharaoh is striking. Herod, in some way, is the new Pharaoh. Feeling his political power slipping away, he lashes out with great malice, but also in great vain. Both Pharaoh and Herod perpetrate devastating losses of life, yet ultimately failed to prevent the birth of the powerful leader of Israel. Both Moses and Jesus are born under threat of death, and both are called to a similar vocation. The story of Jesus' escape into Egypt should bring to mind the story of Moses' birth and rescue as a baby. See, the Israelites had been in Egypt for 400 years. Under the hand of Joseph, the small family of about 70 went down to Egypt to avoid a famine. And now 400 years later, they are a large people group living in a foreign land. They are so large, in fact, they begin to scare the powers that be. Pharaoh would worry that these people might rise up and overthrow him. So what happens when power gets threatened? It lashes out. The Israelites became enslaved in Egypt. They are constricted to build for the Pharaoh. But the Pharaoh gets even more scared, so he decrees that every baby boy that is born to an Israelite is to be killed. But Moses' mom and sisters hide baby Moses while the other babies are being slaughtered. They finally send him down the Nile to be raised in Pharaoh's household. This Moses, though, was to be the liberator of the Israelites. Over many years, he comes to a place where he is a reluctant leader. He's not confident in his own ability to lead. He is not sure he can speak well enough to talk to the Pharaoh. But he would lead God's people out of Egypt. He would lead them through the Red Sea. He would free them from slavery. He would bring them the law from Mount Sinai, and he would lead them through the desert and on to the promised land. He would be the one that later generations would cry out, when later generations would cry out for someone to liberate them. They would ask for someone in the mold of Moses. Through this story in Matthew's gospel, Matthew is trying to get us to realize that Jesus is going to be that person, a liberator in the mold of Moses, one who comes to set people free, one who comes to lead people out of the bonds of slavery, one who comes to offer new life in the land that he has promised. See, Matthew is not shy. He wants his readers to see that this Jesus is going to be the king and the one who will set people free. A liberator that would inspire so many great social justice advocates throughout the past and the present. Jesus spoke truth to power. In fact, it's one of the reasons that they wanted him dead in the end. Jesus challenged the social norms of the day, having women and disciples in his inner circle, talking to the woman at the well, making Samaritans the hero of his stories. Jesus challenged social norms of the day and pushed for more inclusion. He inspired the greats like Martin Luther King Jr., a great American Baptist, by the way, to our modern day prophets like Tracy Blackman, who spoke here only 16 months ago. Challenges the way that the world works, where he wants to see radical inclusion, reconciliation, and grace be the order of the day. But it's not just social liberation that Jesus is concerned with. Throughout his ministry, he was concerned with personal liberation as well. Freeing Zacchaeus from his love of money. Freeing the woman who touched the hem of his robe from her isolation. Empowering lowly fishermen, tax collectors, and other ragamuffins to continue his message of love, justice, and mercy all around the world. Jesus is a liberator that is offering both social and personal transformation. So if we stop with the baby laying in the manger, then we miss the power of the story that Matthew is trying to tell us. The power of one like Moses freeing people once again, freeing people from their sin and addiction, freeing people from loneliness and heartbreak, freeing people from unjust systems and social ills. If we stop with the story, then we miss the power of Christmastide, the 12 days after Christmas, the 12 days when we remember the foreigners honored Christ as king, the 12 days when we remember infant Jesus and his parents were immigrants seeking asylum in a foreign country, the 12 days after Christmas when we remember Matthew foretells that Jesus is going to be a liberator like Moses, one that will set the people free from both the sins of their own and the unfortunate consequences of other people's sins as well, challenging the systems at large. These 12 days after Christmas are when all the hopes that we have talked about on Christmas Eve begin to come true. In the midst of our pain and suffering, we find a Jesus that knows what it is to run away from a dictator and knows what it is to spend time in a foreign land. These 12 days after Christmas, we remember Mary and Joseph not being able to go back to their hometown, but having to go to a new city, the city of Nazareth. These 12 days of Christmas, let us remember that the Christ child was born to come to bring liberation for people groups and for individual. Let us remember that this king did not use his power for his own, but for all humanity, that he came to proclaim freedom for the captives, to give sight to the blind, to make the lame walk, to give hope to the hopeless, to offer justice to the dispossessed, and to come to us all with love. My friends, these are the gifts. These gifts of Christ do not just last for 12 days after Christmas, but they begin now and on to eternity. My friends, that is news worth spreading, and I guarantee that's worth more than a partridge in a pear tree. Amen.